I'm Emlen Metz, and I'm here with my colleague Aditya to talk about a course at UC Berkeley that's now expanded to a number of other universities called Sense Sensibility Science. We didn't start the course, but we've been involved with it for quite a long time. I joined the project as a postdoc originally to do research on it. My background's in psychology, and I decided I could do more of what I wanted, which is a lot of what all of you have been talking about, to improve thinking by staying on this project. So I'm on it indefinitely, and it's a privilege. So this course is sort of really designed around how do we equip students for strategies for more effectively sharing our reality. What do I mean by that? I don't mean agreeing on what reality is. I don't mean that the shared reality is whatever we agree, because there's been many times when we've agreed on something that turned out to be false, right? The Earth is not the center of the universe. But we thought that for a long time, even for good reasons. And yet there is something out there that is the world in which we live, a material world, and it's important to acknowledge that. And the existence of a reality outside ourselves is kind of a basic assumption of science. The first reason this is important is that it's necessary for communication, and I mean this in a very literal sense, that we need some agreement about physical reality, and we need there to be a physical reality that we share in order to hear words that our sounds are carrying to each other's, in the same way to each other's ears, that the words on a page, we are seeing the same words. Without this assumption, there is no communication. And the foil here, I don't know if you've experienced this with your students, but I've had students, sophomores at Berkeley, who will say, whatever anyone really believes, if they really believe it, then for them, that is true. And that means that anyone's belief is just as good as any other belief. And that means you don't have a shared reality, because if anyone's belief is just as good as any other, you have no mechanism for discussion about what is more accurate, because there is no more accurate, it's just what you believe. And this really undermines, to begin with, it undermines our possibility of communicating with each other. But it's not just that. It's also our capacity to understand the world. Each of us has direct perceptual access to a tiny, tiny piece of the world, right? Even if you spend your whole life traveling and seeing as much as you can, you only actually have direct perceptual access to a tiny piece. But by talking to each other, by listening to each other, by sharing information and observations, and not only observations, but also explanations and ideas, we can understand a much larger part of the world. And then finally, action. Because we lived in a shared reality, each of our actions has an effect on other people. And so the existence of a shared reality, it's not just the assumption of science, but it's what grounds epistemic responsibility to each other to try to get as accurate and complete understanding of the world as we can, because what I think about the world affects what the people who are listening to me are going to think. Our thoughts are contagious, our beliefs are contagious, and ethical responsibility for action. My actions affect other people, other people's actions affect me, and so it's necessary that we work together. So we developed, our team has developed a vocabulary of conceptual tools for dealing with this. And a lot of these are things that we've been talking about in the last few days, but we have a particular set. So first, there's the philosophical underpinnings of science. This is sort of the nature of science. What makes science an effective way of knowing? There's the assumption that there is a shared reality. There's something with regular patterns that we can try to make sense of. We can get wrong, and we can advance towards a better understanding through multiple lines of evidence. The importance of causal reasoning to make predictions about what actions are going to bring about what outcomes, and various kinds of sort of more specialized techniques like randomized controlled trials, understanding that correlation does not necessarily mean causation, scientific modeling, which I'll talk about later, and senses and instrumentation that, because as we saw in 2 talks ago, that our senses are very fallible, but by triangulating across our senses, between each other and across instruments, we can be increasingly confident of the validity of our representations. But even with all of that, no matter how much triangulation we have, there is still uncertainty. This is something that's very uncomfortable for us as humans. We like to be confident. We like to think that we know what's going on, but there is uncertainty because we are fallible creatures. And there's a number of techniques, of conceptual tools from science and statistics that help us to cope with this state of uncertainty. How can we identify what the sources of our uncertainty are? How can we reduce those uncertainty? It's different techniques for systematic uncertainty versus statistical uncertainty. How can we reduce the noise when we're trying to figure out where the signal is? How do we avoid falling into traps of seeing patterns in random noise, which is very tempting? We've seen some of those in the memory talk earlier. And how do we trade off the costs of false positives and false negatives? All of these techniques help students to become more comfortable with uncertainty because they give them a place to start. Then there's metacognition. This is my home ground as a psychologist. Heuristics and biases we've heard a lot about. Confirmation bias, slow thinking as the opposite of fast thinking, trying not to jump to conclusions too quickly when the stakes are high enough. Identifying credible sources, which we heard about in the last talk, and finally an actively open mindset, which is a strong predictor of resistance to a lot of these common kinds of mistakes. All of these, sort of drawn from science, are not adequate to help us make good decisions if they're not integrated with thinking clearly about our values and the ways that our values can differ. So we also need a set of techniques for group decision making. How can we come together, understand what the sources of our disagreement are? Are we disagreeing about what's true, about the facts? Are we disagreeing about what's important, the values? How can we integrate those? We teach a little decision analysis. In what context is group thinking better, wisdom of crowds, versus in what context is group thinking worse, herd thinking? And how can we sort of shape our conversations to take advantage of the best features of group discussion and try to counteract some of the dangers? And then finally, a lot of these and a lot of the things we've been talking about the last few days are sort of breaks, the skepticism, the criticism. Wait a minute, I don't know. What can we know? And if we want to make progress, it's not enough to have brakes. We also need to have a gas pedal or an accelerator. And so the sort of can-do spirit of science is how we achieve scientific advancement despite our fallibility, through scientific optimism, understanding that science is a human endeavor, so we are fallible, and yet we can together make some kind of pragmatic, useful sense of the world. And often that means sort of rough estimates can be very useful, like Fermi estimates.
Thank you. I guess this works.
You need both.
I need both? All right. Well, I think I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about the origins of the course and how we came up with this original set of concepts. It's kind of funny looking back and thinking that in 2012, we were really, really worried about the political debates. I won't say more on that. And we were really worried about how are people coming together to make decisions about things that now maybe seem much less consequential, like the debt ceiling and things like that. Not saying that it is. And all of this was sort of framed under this tension that in an idealistic democracy, and it was pointed out to me that that's not really how our democracy works, which is very true, but there's sort of this tension that, knowledge is fighting against this feeling that everyone has a right to vote, whether or not they're informed about an issue. And I think there's an interesting tension here that makes it hard to integrate the public in decision-making at a societal level. And it's equally hard to integrate, each of us in a physics faculty meeting to make a decision together. So I don't say any of these things as sort of from a high horse, but just that group decision-making is pretty hard. And so, this was something that was recognized by Saul Perlmutter, who happened to win the Nobel Prize in physics. And he put out a call in 2012 looking for faculty, grad students, undergrads, everyone who's sort of interested in this issue and how do we come up with a vocabulary and a shared toolkit for making decisions together as individuals, as members of our societies. And what ended up happening is we ended up with about 30 or so grad students, undergrads, faculty members who met every week for almost an entire year. And this was perfect timing because at the same time, Berkeley had come out with this new initiative called the Big Ideas Initiative, which I think Stuart was saying, how do you get these courses involved? Sometimes you just get lucky and you get someone trying to get a course like this together. And they wanted interdisciplinary courses that focused on big issues. And so we had that support. And we're able to launch this course in 2013. with Saul Perlmutter, John McCoon, John Campbell and Rob McCoon, a physicist, a philosopher, and a psychologist. And since then, Saul's stayed on every year, but we've had some variations in our psychologists and philosophers. And so that's actually when I got involved. Someone happened to tell me, oh, there's this interesting course, and so somehow I found the course in 2013 and have managed to stick around. And I guess as I've stuck around, I've tried to help get the course spread to other universities. We have grown the course at Berkeley first from about 80 students. Now there's about 300, a little bit over 300 who take the course pretty much every spring. We've taught the course at Harvard for about 3 years now. We've taught the course at UC Irvine for about 3 years, and also at the University of Chicago. And I think going back to what does it look like to get the shared vocabulary, the set of tools that Emlen was talking about, hopefully it'll be exciting to see what happens. We've been talking with a couple other places. I want to point out the University of Pennsylvania, which I think will be a very interesting experiment to come back and report back on, because it seems like they've gotten approval to get the course to get through all 1,600 first-year students at the University of Pennsylvania. And so if they do, it'll be really interesting to see what does it look like when your entire first-year class, and eventually if this persists for 4 years, your entire university has been exposed to some set of critical thinking concepts, and that's shared vocabulary. And I'll come back to this a little bit later, but I think it's also interesting just to point out that can we build a community here with people teaching similar concepts and similar courses of students who can all engage with each other. For people wondering how do you teach a course like this at scale, we have grown the course to over 300 students, and I think it's just worth pointing out that you can do a lot of it that's graduate student-led or even undergraduate student-led, which we have done in 2014 and a couple other years. So what we do is our course is primarily led by grad students now who have 2 lab discussion sections. We affectionately call them lab discussions, twice a week. And what we do is we get these graduate students who are very interdisciplinary. They come from all different fields, planetary science to psychology to philosophy. And they meet with us and usually a head TA who helps them work through the activities and the class concepts in a group together at twice the speed. And then they go off and they teach the students. And so what you're doing is you're giving the students that shared vocabulary, and you're giving the grad students that shared vocabulary, but also allowing people to bring in their different backgrounds and experiences. And then the students all go off, so they have small sections of 30 or so students, and then they all go off to a shared plenary with the faculty where about 300 people gather usually on Fridays, and come together and ask what further questions, and they can probe further things, and also start to ask what does it look like for faculty to model interdisciplinary conversations. All of this content, or at least let's say 90% of the content, is on a wiki site. I'll share some links for people who are interested to check it out later, but we really wanted to figure out how can we make this as easy as possible for other people to adopt. And so we put on this wiki, there's a list of the topics under the categories that Emlen was talking about. So there's about 28 topics with learning goals, videos, classroom activities, examples of it being used well, examples of common misconceptions, discussion questions, et cetera. The wiki looks a little bit like this. I won't talk too much about this. I highly encourage folks to go check out the wiki and reach out to us if you have questions.
So I'm going to talk about an example activity because I think some of the activities are a resource that might be most useful. So this is an activity that we do towards the beginning of the semester called Modeling the University. So this happens in sections, so led by graduate students, and each group of 4 students drafts a rough model of the university, in our case UC Berkeley, but it could be of any school, for a different purpose. For example, one group might say, okay, I want a model of the university that will help someone find the dinosaurs. Yes, we have dinosaurs, no, they are not alive. So that will look something like a map, right? And another group maybe will predict where the rainfall will flow to prepare for flooding. That's also going to be kind of like a map, but it's going to require different features like topography. Another group might identify the spread of a cold virus, and another one might think about how do rumors spread. So each of these different models serves for a different purpose requires identifying different factors, because what factors you need to understand that function and those aspects in the university are going to be different. And then after the groups have done these, and these are sort of rough models, they compare and contrast between the groups. And so they think about why is it that these models look so different, even though they are all models of the university. They're models of, in a sense, the same thing, but very different aspects of that, because a university is a very complex system. And then we have a number of discussion questions that get them to take this as an object of thought, and why it is that one model that represents everything perfectly is like Borges's map and quite useless. This is important because students often think that flaws in representations make them useless, which of course is not true at all. And so this modeling activity really tries to make explicit what is the function of representation. It's to explain, it's to predict, and to decide, which requires us often explanation, sort of causal models of what's going on, and predictions. How do we figure out which actions that we might take will bring about the outcomes that we want? And it crucially demonstrates the value of simplifying. It demonstrates the value of using different models for different purposes. And it's interactive and student-led, which is sort of crucial. We try to do that throughout the whole course. But it gets them to practice taking representations as objects of thought, to step back from what their ideas are and what they think and say, okay, why am I representing it this way? What am I trying to do with this? What am I including? What am I not including? And why? And this is really important because once they start taking their own representations or their own ideas as an object of thought, it helps them to sort of be less reactive and more open to considering the limitations and uncertainties, and it really prepares them well for the rest of the course. Another big through line of the course is conversations and deliberations. This is a theme that's come up a lot in this conference, of the importance of critical thinking as a social practice. So in my mind, the ideal sort of intellectual conversation has 3 goals, and everyone shares these 3 goals. The first goal is for each person wants to articulate their own thinking. And this is non-trivial. It requires actually a certain kind of trust in the people who you're speaking to, that they're not going to judge you, that they're not going to be mean to you, that they're going to sort of listen in good faith. Second, to understand the thinking of your interlocutors, of the other people in the conversation, and to understand it in a way that is genuine. So to ask good questions, to really try to engage in what I like to call epistemic empathy. Even if I disagree, why can I understand why you think that? What are your reasons for thinking it? What are the experiences? What are the sort of beliefs about the way the world is that make you think what it is that you think? And both of these are to serve a third goal, which is collaborative, that we all share, to construct a deeper, wider understanding of whatever it is we're talking about, because we can learn a lot more and understand something much better if we engage in this kind of really good faith conversation, where we're really trying to articulate, what do I think, and what do you think, and why? We do this through a number of strategies. First, there's the shared lexicon of conceptual tools that I talked about before, which helps students sort of take a step back from reactivity and take their own thinking as an object of thought. There's modeling from the instructors, both the faculty and the graduate students. There are explicit conversational norms that it's okay to be unsure, it's okay to say, I don't know, it's okay to change your mind, and it's even okay to offer an argument against your own position, because the goal is not to persuade everyone that you're right or to show off. The goal is to understand. And then giving them tools to identify what are the sources of disagreement, because the way that you sort of deal with disagreement about claims of fact versus values is sort of different. And lots of practice in plenary, in small groups, in the whole section, in pairs, and so on. And we also have an interview practice activity that I developed recently based on my experience training psychology research assistants, where they came back and said, hey, my boyfriend says I'm a much better listener now. So I thought, maybe this could be scaled. And so far we've gotten some good results and feedback from that. And we're working on more. Oh, it's not advancing.
first. So I think really what this course is we claim it's about societal decision making, but really it's about relationships. And I say that because in the end of the course we have midterms and quizzes and whatnot, but we also have this final project that we ask students to do, and we ask them to about 2 or 3 weeks in pick a topic that they care about, come up with a decision that they need to answer. And the decision could be deeply personal, it could be very grandiose and societal. And then we ask them to take 4 or 5 course concepts and evaluate that decision with that lens in mind. And I think this is one of my favorite classes in the course. At the end of the term, students come and they bring their posters and they present their decision, and they vary greatly. We had a student who came and told us, did a poster on whether she should break up with her boyfriend, and we found out before the boyfriend, so, you know. But I think it's very effective. You know, you can't argue with the poster. And then we have students, you know, coming and talking to us about solving pollution in New Delhi. So we have this very big range of topics, and I think it's really nice to get students to engage in thinking about how to make a decision using these course topics. There's fun examples I can talk about later. It's not a perfect enterprise by any means. There are failure modes. Students sometimes will use confirmation bias as one of their topics, and the poster is also a little bit confirmation biasy. But and then the other really fun class I want to point out, I think it's just a great time, and this is something I'm hoping we can invite people here and people at universities around the country to start to think about and maybe work on together, is something called deliberative polling. I don't know how many people here have heard of deliberative polling. It's a technique invented by Jim Fishkin, who's now at Stanford and runs the Center for Deliberative Democracy. But broadly, the way it works is you get a representative group of your population, and they used to fly them out to a retreat somewhere. Now a lot of them happen on Zoom, and you give them briefing materials. So they all come in. The people in general take this very seriously. You give them briefing material on some issue that matters to them, and so this has happened around the world in different contexts. It could be, you know, fracking, which we actually started in 2013. We did fracking. We've done gene drives. We've done a bunch. You bring the people together to groups of 10 to 15 or so, and you have them review the briefing materials together. And they vote on their sort of opinion on the topic ahead of time. But the entire purpose of the poll, and it doesn't always happen this way, but the purpose is not to convince each other of your point of view. The purpose is to come up with questions that you want to ask experts. So they sit in these groups of 10 to 15, and they come up with questions that they want to ask experts. And then what we do is we bring in a panel of experts with diverse opinions, right? So for fracking, we've brought in oil and gas people, we've brought in Sierra Club people. For gene drives, we got some help from Jennifer Doudna's group and brought in some experts on sort of what does that look like with CRISPR. And so you bring in a broad panel of experts, and then the students get to ask the experts the questions. And then they go back and deliberate some more and come up with a round 2 of questions. And in our class, we usually do this over the course of 2 classes, you know, a section of class, about 3.5 hours. In the real world, it can be a whole day. I've seen some that take 2. And I think it's a great way of getting students, again, to practice making decisions together, even if the method is not perfect. And we have invited, over the years, students from the other universities where we're teaching the course, whether it's Chicago or Harvard, to participate as well. And so you get this really nice cross-disciplinary exercise and cross-university exercise. A lot of people talked about books. There is a book. It is over there. I didn't even realize it was over there, but it is over there. And what we wanted to do with this book is really try to share something that could be used as a textbook. It's based off of lectures from the course, but also really as something that would just be entertaining to read, and something that hopefully, you know, gets my grandmother to send me a few fewer WhatsApp messages.
So we've been talking so far about the college curriculum, which is what most of this conference has been about, college. I've spent a lot of the last few years developing a high school curriculum, which is an adaptation of our college curriculum, covering a lot of the same concepts. The curriculum is, we did in collaboration with the Nobel Prize Outreach, and it's free. So the PDFs are just online, free for anyone to download and use. It's called Scientific Thinking for All, a toolkit. We're launching this summer with 6 units. 4 of them are already up there, but the last 2 are in layout right now. And each unit is designed to empower students with scientific critical thinking skills. And each of them is a cluster of the sort of topics that I talked about at the beginning, embedded in the context of a real socio-scientific issue like clean water access or air quality. And each unit consists of 10 very different kinds of activities, including readings, games, card activities, field trips, and so on. So if you know any high school teachers, especially science high school teachers who might be interested in this, we're sort of looking to recruit. It's free. We're hoping that it's going to be a really useful resource. It fits best into science classrooms, particularly environmental science, but with parts also for media literacy and civics. And the website looks sort of like this. There's a QR code if you're interested. And you see that we have the same icons. So it's the same sort of set of concepts as the college course. There's a couple of concepts like blind analysis, which is a really new technique for avoiding confirmation bias in statistical analysis, which we don't teach to high school students because they barely know what analysis is. But we do teach at the college level, but mostly it's the same concepts, just starting at a more basic level and making fewer assumptions about what the students are coming in with.
So I didn't want to finish this talk without at least acknowledging that there is this creature called Claude AI, other things. I heard Opus 4.8 came out today. I think, and it's been really encouraging, I will say, talking to folks here who think that the sort of things that we've been talking about, critical thinking, is more important than ever. And I just want to take a moment to reiterate that point. I think in an age of AI where there's all this information coming in, it's especially important to be teaching these concepts and really trying to think about how do we empower students to be critical evaluators of the content that AI is going to give us. I don't want to sound entirely negative. I think I am somewhat negative about it, but I don't want to sound entirely negative. I think there are elements where AI can be used productively, and we've been sort of thinking about these. For example, can you use AI to mediate conversations between people who would otherwise find it really hard to find common ground? And I think people tend to think of AI as a fairly neutral party sometimes, and so there could be lots of cases like that where it is really, really useful. And then I think there's questions around how can you use AI to scale, which we can talk about later. But broadly, I think it's really important to try and train students to avoid being fooled by AI, and I can give other examples later. I just want to acknowledge and thank our course development team. This is our current team, but as we've been saying, this has been the product of 14 years of work that we are now, and we're still chugging along. And so there's a lot more people. There's probably about 15, 20 people who are involved in teaching the course every year at Berkeley, not to mention other universities. So there's a ton of work that's gone into it, and we're very grateful for all of that.
Can I say one more thing about that? And so you might notice if you look closely at this slide that we're very physics and psychology heavy, but there have also been biologists and philosophers involved in the course. And the interdisciplinarity is been a real privilege to work with. I love all these people. And yeah, so we just want to end with a sort of invitation. I hope that you might find some of the resources on our wiki useful. This is the top one is the site link, but it doesn't have access to the activities and quiz questions and so on. You need to get an instructor login. So the second QR code is the instructor login place. You can request an account and then email one of us, and we'll give you an account. Or we'll check it in a few days to see if we recognize any of the emails, because we get, we don't want students to have access to the quiz questions for obvious reasons. It has classroom activities, examples both from science and real life, common misconceptions, and we would love to hear from you what you find useful, especially if you wind up using something. And as Aditya said, we're sort of interested in trying to get a bigger deliberative pool to have students from different institutions talking to each other. We have
2 minutes, I think. So.
Thank you. Well, if I don't see any, do you have any kind of assessments of outcomes? Like, do you have some goals for what you want your students to leave with, and have you assessed that? Do you have any data on that?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's the learning goals that are on the wiki, but then we also have a pre-post survey, multiple choice that captures change. So we get from year to year Cohen's D from like 0.4 to 0.7, 0.8 even 1 year. So it's decent for an educational intervention. And these are things that require students to apply the concepts to new contexts. So there was some discussion earlier about how difficult it is to teach critical thinking in a domain general way. And the way that we do that is we give them a lot of examples and a lot of practice and a lot of different kinds of contexts. And so each class they spend, like really 2 hours and then also some homework thinking about each concept and applying it in a lot of different contexts. And it does seem to transfer, which is, as I'm sure you know as educators, really hard.
So what would be your favorite learning outcome that you measure? And like what do you think captures it? And how would you state that?
While Emlen's thinking about that, I will just give you my personal favorite outcome, which is completely not statistical. But I had a student reach out to me a couple years ago and say, I'm quitting my tech job and running for Congress because I took your course. So that's my favorite learning outcome.
Yeah, it's hard to beat that one. I think that the
He did not win. We don't teach how to run for office, but if anyone wants to add that, I'd love to see the suggestions.
So the category that students show the biggest improvement in is group decision making.
Oh, decision making.
And I think that's because they get a lot of students come in, these are Berkeley students, they come in with some background in, why you can't infer causation from correlation, like a little bit of statistical reasoning, a little bit of causal reasoning. That's not brand new, like we have new angles on it, but it's not brand new. But the group decision-making stuff, a lot of them have never been exposed to anything like that. So I think that might be, that's sort of really the biggest value add statistically.
Emlen, thank you so much for sharing your project with us, especially 2013. You've had a lot of time to mature. I think there's quite a bit of overlap. We hope to see you at LiliCon 2027.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.